this fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why. I can't break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. Well, I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. Ooh, I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Welcome in. I know my voice is working because I worked on that all day. To episode 1.39 of Fixer's Heavy Metal History as we tweak some audio settings on the way in. Hopefully that transition sound and the electricity and everything was heard as well. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's get a couple things out of the way to start the show tonight. I have two new pieces of hardware. Can't tell the face cam's a little bit clearer because I am now on an Elgato face cam, which is much better than what I used to use. The audio issues are coming from the new preamp, which is Wave XLR, also the Elgato. All-day voice work, indeed. What's up, Dustin? So I'm having to do a little bit of software mixing with this new preamp, and those three things that weren't working, and probably two or three other ones tonight, are just a matter of me having to change the way they're presented in OBS into the mix instead of being direct to desktop audio. That is just how it goes as you try to change things in your stream. Rocket, thank you for the host, as well as Fish, 19 months. Rocket, 23 months. Turry, 20 months at Tier 1. Thank you all very much. So, the second thing, now that I've gotten out of the way, and one thing that's very nice about this preamp is I can back up. I can tap a button on it and just touch it, and just boom, mic's gone. Yeah, software mixing with respect to presenting a few sources. I'm going to have to make tweaks on the fly tonight. So if you're on YouTube, do it. And for those of you in the stream, thank you for helping me troubleshoot it because I can hear it. It's just not being presented to the stream. It's big and red. There's no way I can miss the fact that I'm muted there. And it's really, I bought it because of work and the ability to quick tap mute for conference calls. That's the real reason I bought this new preamp. But we're on episode 1.39. 7 episodes, including this one, left in the French Revolution. And this is a big one. My outline is 15 pages. This board does not show everybody I'm going to talk about tonight because there wasn't enough room. So I think there's the potential that we might actually take 3 breaks tonight. So I encourage you, while I'm doing my opening spiel, and I did so in Twitch or on Discord and in Twitter, get a snack because this is not going to be a small episode. But thank you all for being here. Looking at the end of the tunnel, and we are 2 episodes away from going to Egypt with Napoleon, believe it or not. But tonight, this episode is going to greatly change everything about how the French Revolution has progressed thus far across 38 episodes. So let's get to it. I have on the board tonight grouped 3 individuals with a gold box. The reason for that grouping will become very apparent as we go through tonight's episode. But just so you know, they are 3 of your directors: Paul Barras, Louis Larevellier, and Jean Roubel. The director is going to have a night, as is Napoleon. And speaking of Napoleon, when we last left off last episode, we left Napoleon with the now successful capture, the fall of Mantua, in the Northern Italy campaign happening around February 1797. And this episode, I am going to pick right up where I left off for a change and push that Italian campaign to the preliminary treaty negotiations with the Austrians at Leoben. Then we're going to hop back over to France to cover the elections of year 5, which hopefully my foreshadowing has done the job. They're not going to go very well for the incumbent regime, and it's going to bring a whole bunch of new conservative delegates into the legislative councils of the French Directory. Then we're going to cover the events of the summer of 1797, culminating with what is known historically as the Coup of Fructidor in September, wherein the Directory will bail on the Constitution in order to save the Constitution. And then finally, we will get to the Treaty of Campo Formio in October, where the War of the First Coalition will come to an end and just leave Great Britain as the single belligerent against France. So General Napoleon Bonaparte wasted no time getting back to work after the fall of Mantua. And remember, it was the 4th attempt of the Austrians to relieve Mantua that he quite convincingly turned back. And Austria just said, yeah, we're never going to be able to pull this off. But capturing that fortress, while it was the key to the Austrians' hold on northern Italy, was just one key part in Napoleon's larger plans. It was just a check on his list, because next up for Napoleon was to actually charge right at the Austrians and flat out win the war. So Napoleon is going to turn his way north through the Alps and head right toward Vienna, as we said last episode. But before he could do that, before Napoleon could say go and run right into Austria, he actually needed to solidify his hold on Italy. And he had to do so by shoring up his flanks, and more specifically his southern flank. And so he wheeled around for a brief moment and smacked down Pope Pius VI. And the point here was that Napoleon didn't want His Holiness to get any smart ideas about maybe doing something with his limited papal forces while Napoleon's rear was facing south. So just days after the fall of Mantua, like days, not a week, not a month, days after the fall of Mantua, Bonaparte targeted a 7,000-man papal army in Faenza, which was allegedly defending the papal states. But a 7,000-man army is really not going to do anything against Napoleon's, somewhere around 30,000-man army. Napoleon marched a 9,000-man division straight south, and the resulting battle with that papal army was no contest whatsoever. The now very highly trained, extremely disciplined, and thoroughly experienced French troops in the army of Italy endured like 0 casualties, while forcing the papal army to surrender. And on February 9th, 1797, the Pope signed what is known historically as the Treaty of Tolentino. This treaty had a lot of different things to it, but the first was that it required the Pope and the Vatican to hand over even more hard currency, more hard cash, not paper, but specie, to the French. And it also required the Pope to recognize, this is great, recognize the right of the French armies to loot valuable treasures and works of art from the Vatican. Now, we talked about that, how that's kind of how the Louvre gets its initial big bulk of artwork, is they snatched it from Italy. Included in this total capitulation of the Vatican was also a further ceding of territory both inside of Italy and within the boundaries of France. And I'll draw your attention to the first map that's on the board tonight, because I have highlighted, remember these? Remember, the Vatican still claimed sovereignty over the papal city of Avignon and the Comtat-Venaissin region, which surrounds Avignon. Now, long time ago in our narrative, the French government said those are ours and annexed them, but it wasn't recognized by the Pope. They had been annexed way back in 1791, but the Vatican never recognized it. Well, Article 5 of the treaty said, quote, "The Pope renounces purely and simply all the rights to which he may lay claim over the city and territory of Avignon and the Canton Venison and its dependencies, and transfers and makes over said right to the French Republic." End quote. So that was the Vatican saying, we now officially recognize these belong to France. It helped that Napoleon Bonaparte had a gun to his head. The treaty also required the Pope to recognize Napoleon's brother Joseph Bonaparte as French ambassador to Rome. Now, last episode I started talking about, as we explored the reorganization of northern Italy, that Napoleon's going to set his family up all over the place to be rulers of areas. This is the first step in setting up his familial dynasty. He did this without zero. Hey, Matt.
I don't know which of us he's in.
But Napoleon does this, sets his brother Joseph up as ambassador to the Vatican on behalf of France without any authority from the director. He just does it. He makes it part of the treaty that he's negotiating, again, without any real authority given by the nation of France. And this, with his rear flank now secured and the Pope pretty much put into a box, Bonaparte then made ready to push his way out of Italy altogether and plunge into the heart of the Austrian Empire. So with the situation now pretty critical, right? Napoleon is up there in the Cisalpine Republic around Venice, moving out of Milan into the red area at the top of your map, which is basically Austria, the Austro-Hungarian or the Habsburg holdings. The situation for Austria is getting pretty critical. They sent four armies down to defeat Napoleon, who to this point hasn't really been reinforced, and they haven't been able to do anything. So what they do now is they tap Archduke Charles, the guy who successfully turned back 2 French armies along the Rhine, to go down and try to contain Napoleon on the Italian side of the Alps. So don't let him get across the mountains. Unfortunately for Charles, though, there really wasn't very much he was going to be able to do. Because the French Directory had finally woken up to the fact that, Bonaparte was winning the war and sent him finally a load of reinforcements, which brought Napoleon's field army in Italy up to about 60,000 men. So it doubled his force, which I'm sure the Austrians looked at and said, oh my God. So what Napoleon does initially is he takes 20,000 of these men and just peels them off the top of his force. And he sends them into the passes that the Austrians could come down through the Alps to get into Italy, basically to flank around him. He just starts stationing forces in these passes. And then he takes the other 40,000 men now at his command and crosses the Brenta River northeast towards the Austrian army, who were trying to hold their last little foothold on the Italian side, the southern side of the Alps. Bonaparte's main hope here in rushing back to the offensive very quickly, like he was done with Mantua, and a couple days later he's down in the Papal States, and now he's rushing back up north. His main hope here was that he was going to drive through the Austrian forces, now under the command of Archduke Charles, before Charles had a chance to really get in there and assess what was going on and organize everything. And that's pretty much how it went. Archduke Charles allegedly, historical records vary, he allegedly had about 50,000 men at his disposal, but as Napoleon began his advance north, Charles's forces were all over the place. They were just this net that was cast everywhere. And we hopefully have understood at this point from the tactical analysis of many battles that lack of force concentration is a really bad thing, especially against Napoleon. So over the course of March 1797, these scattered little pockets of Austrian army forces, the French just kept encountering them, and the Austrian forces just really outnumbered. They were either captured outright or they were forced into retreat. Bonaparte himself was coming north in 2 columns. He had a main force of about 30,000 men that he was leading, basically aimed at Vienna, the capital of Austria, himself. And then he had a paralleling force that was moving in the same direction he was, just kind of guarding his northern flank to the north. And the purpose of that force was, if they ran into anything big, they could fall back and reconsolidate with the main body, but let Napoleon know where the big column of Archduke Charles's forces was. The thing about those 11,000 men in that paralleling force was that they moved so fast, because remember, Napoleon is moving armies around Europe faster than anybody right now. They moved so fast that they actually got through the Alps and took the pass at Tarvis. And it's not on the map, but it was a critical pass that was going to prevent Charles from sending any reinforcements to, quite literally, Austrian elements that were now behind the French. Too small to be problematic, but they were separated from their main body. Charles eventually did get some reinforcements up to Tarvis at this pass with the 11,000 man French forces coming through. But they found by the time they got there that the French had already controlled the pass. They had it. A fight did ensue, and the Austrians did manage to dislodge this evening, Archie. A fight did ensue, and the Austrians did manage to dislodge this 11,000 man French force for about a day, but the next day, the French just counterattacked and pushed the Austrians into a full-blown retreat out of the pass at Tarvis. And they just kept running back through the entire pass they were supposed to actually be there to defend. And they retreated so rapidly. The Austrians were out of there so fast that as a part of this battle, an Austrian force had actually gotten behind the French lines. 4,000 Austrians did. And all the French did was surround that and cut them off and make them capitulate. And they did on March 23rd. So after the French captured this pass at Tarvis, Archduke Charles took a look around, took a look at how he still wasn't properly concentrated, how he had units and divisions all over the place that were just getting cut off, and decided the position of defending the southern side of the Alps was just untenable. He couldn't do it. And so he makes the decision to evacuate Italy entirely. He cedes it to Napoleon. He's hoping then to draw a new line of defense on the northern side, the Austrian side of the Alps. And while Charles is doing this, while Charles is backing up, going to the north side of the Alps, Bonaparte is actually fanning his men out all over northeast Italy to try to hold down strategic points which he just had acquired, like Trieste and Palminova along the northern Adriatic Sea. He planned to use these sites on the northern Adriatic to
clonk that follow button.
To be kind of his supply and communications bases as he made a push into Austria proper. While at the same time, Bonaparte ordered 20,000 of the men which he had left back guarding the northern Alpine passes to now come forward. Basically, the troops that were there defending Mantua, he said, yep, you need to come up and join the main body. And they started to advance, Napoleon's main force and now 20,000 men and the 11,000 men, for a planned convergence that was going to bring them all together deep inside Austrian territory. But then on March 31st, 1797, Napoleon Bonaparte sent a letter to Archduke Charles, asking if Archduke Charles was interested in an armistice. Napoleon pointed out the fact in this letter that you're in a really bad situation. No need to defend Mantua anymore? Well, let's have a look at that. Where is Mantua? Mantua is right about here, right? So here is where the main body of Napoleon's forces were. And as he pushed north, he's actually pushing this way, because he's setting up those bases along the Adriatic here. He's got two paralleling forces that are moving through the Alps. And the Austrians are pulling back. They're going, oh, and they're backing off. So there's a lot of troops that are hanging out back here at Mantua. It's pretty far away from the front at that point. It's that reserve force that we talked about as well last week. He just brings them forward. So it's not like he needed the troops back there anymore. There wasn't any significant threat to the Austrians retaking Mantua because they had Napoleon in their own backyard now. And they weren't going to go and try to retake the key to northern Italy while Napoleon was effectively stomping around in their front yard. So Napoleon sends this letter on March 31st, 1797 to Archduke Charles and says, armistice? I think you want it because look at what's going on. You are in a horrible position. You have troops scattered everywhere. You are in no position to defend against me. And Charles did not immediately answer the letter. So Napoleon just kept marching. And this was a little bit of a bluff because, as I said, Napoleon had kind of fanned out some elements of his army to guard some strategic points all over the Alps as he crossed them because he's trying to make sure he's not going to get flanked. So Bonaparte's position in this letter to Archduke Charles isn't as strong as he's letting on either. He's basically saying, look, I'm about to crush you. You know it. Maybe we should come to some sort of ceasefire. And he wasn't completely bluffing, but he was kind of bluffing. He was not as strong as he was saying. His force was not as well concentrated as it could have been to make such a demand. So to keep up this bluff, he ordered the main force of his army to just march as fast forward as they could towards Vienna. Like, make it obvious that is where they were going. They marched through the Alps, and on April 7th, the French army of northern Italy had made it as far as Leoben, which was just 100 miles southwest of Vienna. It's off the map here, but think about it. The capital of the Austrian Empire, the Habsburg monarchy, Vienna. 100 miles away is a force of at least 50,000 men. That's when Charles replied to the letter and said, okay, please stop. A few days later, Austrian envoys came into Napoleon's camp and requested a 5-day ceasefire, which they got. And when that 5 days was up, they requested it, and it was renewed for a further 5 days. And while those second 5 of these 10 days were going, real talks to put a stop to the fighting got going in earnest. Negotiating on behalf of the French Republic with absolutely zero authority to do so, Bonaparte and his Austrian counterparts agreed on April 18th to what we now know and call the Leoben Peace Preliminaries. By the time we get to the end of this episode this evening, you will see that the preliminaries at Leoben form the basis for the Treaty of Campo Formio, which actually takes Austria out of the fighting for a couple of years. But what was discussed in this preliminaries, in the Leoben preliminaries, and what eventually will become the foundationals of Campo Formio, is that Austria will cede Belgium, the Austrian Netherlands. They will cede Belgium and the west bank of the Rhine, all those little German principalities, to France. All of that will become French territory. So France will extend its natural borders to the Rhine River. Austria also recognized the new independent republics Napoleon created and was still creating in Italy. So the Cisalpine, the Transalpine republics that he had, or Cispadane and Transpadane republics that he had made in Italy, Austria was forced to recognize their sovereignty. But at Leoben, Napoleon Bonaparte included a controversial... Did they have anything like a delegate on mission? No. No. Those days were over. The representatives on mission ended when the Directory became a thing. There was no political commissar in Napoleon's army. He probably would have just tied him up. But at the preliminaries at Leoben, Napoleon includes a controversial enticement to get the Austrians to agree to this. Specifically, he offers them sovereignty over the heretofore neutral Republic of Venice. Now, that Republic of Venice is one of the other reasons that this is on the map, because you have this area right here, Venice, which was neutral, not supporting Austria, not supporting the French, borders Austria, but Napoleon says, yeah, you can have that if we get Belgium and pretty much all the territory running up to the west bank of the Rhine. Since the main French ambition at this point was to secure the natural boundaries of France, getting Austria to abandon its claims to everything west of the Rhine was the main goal. And Napoleon knew it. And offering Venice as compensation for them giving up that territory was a way of getting them to agree. But this, like I said, it's going to prove to be a pretty controversial move by Napoleon. First off, he doesn't have the authority to do this. This isn't French territory. France doesn't control Venice. He just says, we don't want that. You can have it. It was an independent republic. And he just says, yeah, that's Austria's now. But the other part is, the French revolutionary ethos optics, the way this looks in terms of the way the revolution has been pursued, doesn't look good at all. Because for the most part, believe it or not, the French still believe they owned the moral high ground in the war. That they were a republic of citizens, freeing their fellow man from the despotic shackles of old Europe, as they hand Venice to the despotic shackles of old Europe. So it doesn't look great. Bonaparte in this instance is trading territory like the most arrogant ancien regime diplomat. So for the government of France, it doesn't look great that he's just like, yeah, he's horse trading, which is one of those complaints that everyone had rolling into the Estates General, that secret treaties and clauses of all these arrogant nobles. That was one of their big complaints. He's sending so much cash home that permission slips are getting buried in treasure, to a degree. But Napoleon was able to justify screwing over Vienna thanks to an ill-timed anti-French uprising in Verona, which was in Venetian territory. On April the 17th, the 400-man French garrison in Verona was attacked by local Venetians and slaughtered. Bonaparte then looked at that and used it as his excuse to dictate terms to the Venetians with a pretty heavy hand. So he kind of was given an out. It didn't look great that Napoleon is saying, here, Austria, have Venice, as long as we can have Belgium and pretty much everything west of the Rhine River. Oh, well, look at that. You killed 400 Frenchmen. We're going to come in here and tell you that you have to do this now, because the alternative is we're going to roll in here with an army. And it worked out. So the Austrians agreed to all of this, and couriers were then dispatched all over the place, including up to the Rhine, to tell everyone to stop fighting. And the couriers got to the Rhine frontier almost just in time. So we're going to kind of wrap things up along the Rhine River here. Hopefully you remember how General Jean-Baptiste Jourdan had basically been hung out to dry by both General Pichegru in 1795 and General Moreau in 1796. Both of those guys failed to link up with him, because then they could have really trounced Archduke Charles. Well, Jourdan's reward for getting hosed by his colleagues was that the French Directory decided to blame Jourdan for the failure of the Rhine campaigns in both years. As preparations were starting for a new offensive on the Rhine before all this stuff at Leoben was going down, the Directory actually relieved Jourdan of his command of his army that was positioned along the Rhine River. And in his place, they promoted Lazare Hoche, conqueror of the Vendée, whose flagship had eventually made it back from the bumbled invasion of Ireland. Hoche was pretty excited about the chance to rehabilitate his image. And in the second week of April 1797, Hoche led his army across the Rhine and defeated an Austrian army at Neuven on April 18th. But just as Hoche was getting his mojo going, those messengers from Leoben made it to the Rhine frontier with the news that a deal had been struck. This deal at Leoben, the preliminaries, which would lead to the Treaty of Campo Formio, would end fighting on the European continent for 2 full years. 1797 now, we won't have fighting really again on the land of the continent of Europe for 2 years, 1799. Just so happens to be when Napoleon really comes to power. So there we go. This war that we've been talking about since the Legislative Assembly started saber rattling in 1791, 1792, looks like it's starting to whittle itself down to just the British. So we're going to take Austria and put them over here. Never thought that day would come. So as I mentioned last episode, as we pivot into tonight's second topic, the elections of 1797, as I mentioned last episode, we discussed this pivot to conservatism that was happening in France. Yeah, a whole 2-year break. Remember, it was a generational conflict. This is just, and it's really not a break, right? Because the French are still fighting the British. But as I mentioned last episode, as we discussed the pivot to conservatism, Bonaparte's actions were really helping the Directory out, right? News that he had just now brought the Austrians to their knees was really good news for the Directory. But it didn't come in time, didn't come soon enough to save the directorial regime from the political bloodbath that they're about to endure. The national finances of France are still a mess. Napoleon's providing a measure of stability with his conquests in Italy and his sending home of hard specie. And the French economy is still struggling badly. It's just not, insolvent anymore. It's not bankrupt to the point that they can't pay their bills, because there was a serious risk of that as the Directory took power. The new territorial mandate, that paper currency which was supposed to replace the assignat, they were dead on arrival. Within 6 months of their creation, the territorial mandate as a replacement for the assignat was just as worthless and as defunct as the assignat. And the Directory tried a few tricks over to the course of 1796 to prop up the paper mandate, but nothing worked. And by February 1797, the Directory just admitted defeat and stopped printing them. And after that, we've come from the livre to the assignat as a bond to the territorial mandate as a bond. But after this, there is no paper currency in France. It wouldn't be issued by the government. France just returned to a money economy based on hard metal specie. the revolutionary, at least the revolutionaries' experiments with trying to establish a paper currency for France were over. You wouldn't see them return to those attempts until well into the Restoration. So all of these economic problems helped to further bolster conservative arguments that the Republican government was itself the cause of everyone's misfortune, including their financial misfortune. And the conservatives who were out there still printing their papers, kind of being allowed to do what they wanted to do, basically, they started asking the people flat out, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And it's hard to gauge time here, right? Because we spent so long in 1793 and 1794, and we've just sped through 1795, 1796, 1797. The directory's been around a little while. It's been around, now for a year. We had the post-terror Thermidorians for a year or a little bit, which led us into the directory. We're years past when Robespierre, died. So they're asking everyone, look back to before basically the Great Terror started. Are you better off now than you were then? And aside from those few speculators out there who were capitalizing off of the failing of the Océan and buying property, the answer was no. Not in the slightest are we better off now than we were 4 years ago. So in the lead up to the spring elections, which will replace 1/3 of all of the delegates in both of the legislative councils, conservatives tried to mobilize and then exploit all of this disenfranchisement, which was there, but they were also certainly trying to gin up. A new movement, not a club, but a movement, called the Friends of Order, began to attract adherents from all over France. And they began to set up a new political club. It's kind of a political club, not in the way you might think of like the Jacobins, but it was certainly organizing politically. They set up this new political club, and it was called the Philanthropic Society. And the purpose of the Philanthropic Society was to spread conservative, monarchical gospel. How returning to the monarchy would stabilize France, bring them back to a sense and state of normalcy, but more importantly, stability in all aspects. But remember, within this conservative camp that is out there pushing for a return to monarchy, there is a split between absolutist and constitutional monarchists. So though these monarchists were all working toward the same goal of getting conservatives elected into the legislative councils, within the conservative movement and the delegates, which would now shortly be elected to the legislative councils, a small absolutist clique formed called the Legitimate Sons, who still dreamed of overthrowing the Republic rather than slowly undermining it all from the inside, which was the plan now. Some of these Legitimate Sons got it in their head that the reason that the army garrison at Grenelle, which we mentioned last episode, had been impervious to the overtures of Babeuf, the conspiracy of equals, and then the subsequent Jacobin attempt to start an uprising, was because the garrison at Grenelle was actually secretly royalist. So in January 1797, the Legitimate Sons made their own play at using the garrison at Grenelle to launch a coup. But this attempt was exposed at an even more preliminary state than Babeuf's conspiracy of equals. And all of the conspirators involved from the Legitimate Sons were arrested. And what this aborted coup attempt using the same garrison that's just not interested in trying to overthrow the government for the third time, all this did was prove to the other conservatives that they were on the right path, and the only way to get a victory which is get us into government so we can undermine the government, was victory at the ballot box. When we come back from a break, we're going to talk about that victory at the ballot box and then what it does to the directory who, in the aftermath of that election, are going to have to lose a member. Because remember, the directory was given 5 members, and then we're going to pick one out of the hat, and that guy has to step down for 5 years until the rotation's going, because one director is supposed to step down every single round of elections. We're going to get to the conservative sweep in 1797, and then exactly what goes down in the directory when we get back. So stand up, take a break, get a drink, get that snack rocket. We have a lot more to go tonight. Hopefully you're enjoying yourself. Thanks for hanging out, and I will talk to you all in just a few minutes.
Gentlemen, we're history.
Rocket picked Arky's pocket while I was gone. By the way, Mads brought up the Clink emote. There are several new emotes. I did preserve BK LOL because I know you guys like that one, but I did replace several others. So before we went to the break, we were discussing how the elections of 1797 were not going to go the directory's way. How there was a concerted movement among conservative monarchists in France to actually get into power and effectively tear apart the government. Dustin steals from himself. Doesn't surprise me. He's kind of blind. I know you would have rided, man. That's why I kept it. So we roll into these elections. The elections of year 5. They were held from March 21st to April 9th, 1797. So pretty much the time frame that Napoleon's having his treaty negotiations at Leoben. With ominous conservative stirrings everywhere, the very nervous directors actually tried to rig the vote, shocker, by attempting to disqualify potential royalist voters. Many, since Thermidor and then the amnesty that the directory brought,
Remember to clonk that follow button.
many former emigres, nobles, and everyone else who had just run from France tried to come back to France. And they were eager to vote, and to vote conservative, because of course they were. But the directory still had a list of all of those officially prescribed, meaning come back and you're charged with a crime, emigres, from the old days of the Committee of Public Safety. And they said if your name is on that list, you don't get to vote. So much for that pardon. Then, at Lazare Carnot's insistence, he's kind of one of the more conservative guys on the directory. At Carnot's insistence, the directory ordered in early March that all candidates for legislative councils swear an oath, both of hatred of monarchy and hatred of the Constitution of 1793, like swear an official oath. And this move by Carnot forced a lot of monarchists to either stay in their closet or to stay home. But none of this was going to be enough to overcome the prevailing conservatism of the electorate, in combination with the just general feeling of apathy and exhaustion of the voters, right? As usual for France during the Revolution, the turnout for the elections of Year 5 was pathetic. And it's kind of one of those defining features of the French Revolution, well, at least democracy during the French Revolution. There just wasn't a single election that's happened since the Estates General where turnout for the election wasn't just comically low. People were tired. They'd been through a lot. But of those who said, yep, I'm going to get up and go vote today, they voted conservatives. They voted for the conservatives by far. The electorate was conservative by like a huge margin. This is how huge. Of the two councils, the Council of 500 and the Council of Ancients, of the two legislative councils, 234 delegates were up for re-election in the elections of Year 5. All of them, you'll remember, were holdovers from the National Convention, because that's the way that the law of two-thirds worked. Of the 234 incumbent delegates up for re-election, the voters re-elected 11 of them. 11 of 234. That's it. And those 11 were the most conservative of the 234 who got reelected. The rest of them were just told, go find another job. Of the new incumbent delegates, the delegate elects who were coming in, 182 of them were identifiably royalist. None of them could be called left-leaning at all. This resounding defeat of the incumbent regime was not just a defeat of the directory per se, but it was a defeat and rejection of everything that had happened since August the 10th, 1792. You'll remember, that's when Georges Danton and his buddies basically ran into the Tuileries Palace, pulled the king out, and led to his execution, toppled the monarchy. The election pretty much was a rebuke of everything that had happened in France since then. So, of course, this alarmed the remaining committed Republicans that were still working in positions within the directory. They're like, uh-oh. Those committed Republicans were led by a little 3-man triumvirate within the 5-man directory, and that is why I have them bordered in gold this evening. We're talking about Louis-Marie de la Revellier, Jean-Francois Rubel, and Paul Barras. And I'm going to say that word triumvirate many times tonight. And that's why I have them bordered in gold. Because when I say triumvirate, you should be thinking those three guys. And though Barras was kind of always a wild card, the catastrophic losses in the elections drove him into a working alliance with the other two to preserve the Republic at all costs. Because one more election like this one, and the Royalists would actually catapult themselves into working majorities. They would control both the Council of 500 and the Council of Ancients if they had one more good election the next year. So Jean Rubel actually, within the directory, suggested they just annul the results, just toss them out. Right then and there. But Lazare Carnot, the slightly more conservative colleague of theirs on the directory, retorted with the crazy idea that the director should just try to work with the councils that the voters had put into power. Crazy thought. If the elections were not going to be respected from Carnot's perspective, then what were they all doing there? Now, also from Carnot's perspective, if these delegates who were elected, who had sworn that they hate monarchy and sworn that they hate the Constitution of 1793, went back on those oaths, that was something the directory could deal with. So, when the new Council of 500 and the new Council of Ancients met for their first sessions, they did absolutely nothing to alleviate the fears of the triumvirate within the directory. The Council of 500 elected newly minted delegate General Charles Pichegru to be the president of the Council of 500. If you remember, General Charles Pichegru is that guy who left General Jourdan hung out to dry out there on the Rhine in 1795 while he was talking to Louis XVIII. Pichegru, though, still enjoyed the glow that came from being the man who had conquered the Netherlands, and his treasonous correspondence with Louis XVIII that we know about was at that point only really suspected at the highest levels. No one had any proof. It was not common knowledge that he was even suspected of treason. So, of course, this guy, there was no reason why these delegates wouldn't kind of put him in charge. He was still a hero. But still, putting Pichegru, a general whose resignation the directory had willingly accepted and said, "Thank you very much, get out of here," putting him in charge as president of the Council of 500 was absolutely a warning shot across the bow of the Republic. The first order of business for the incoming councils was, as I said before the break, replacing that first director, who would be selected by lot to resign. Because again, the structure of the directory was they picked 5, and then every year they would drop one and replace one until the rotation of one every year was solid. They would never get there. So luckily for all of the major players, the name of inconsequential, I didn't even put him on the board tonight, Etienne Francois Letourneur, the other director that's not up there right now, he was selected from the hat. The one guy who really hasn't done anything or partnered with anybody this is reported to have been a genuine luck of the draw. But given what's going to happen down the road, you might have a as hard of a time as I do believing that. There's nothing I can find that says it absolutely was rigged, but it sure feels rigged. So to replace Letourneur, the council appointed Francois-Marie Marquis de Barthélemy. And that gentleman on your grid of people right now is the second row, far right, black and white pencil sketch. He was a conservative diplomat whose claim to fame was negotiating the Treaty of Basel, which, if you remember, is the treaty that got Prussia to step out of the War of the First Coalition. Obviously, the triumvirate of Republican directors was not at all happy about this guy being the new director, but there was also nothing they could do about it. One of the big reasons that Barthélemy was provocative as a choice is because one of the key issues on the directory's table right now was negotiating the end of the war with the Austrians. And you would think that ending the war would be pretty non-controversial, right? But, of course, there was disagreement among the directors as to how to respond to what is now a weak Austria. The Republican triumvirate, Bras, La Revellier, and Rubel, were in favor of even more aggressive expansion. The French war machine was finally fired up and just kicking the snot out of Austria. Why would we stop? Apart from saving lives. Oh, and the spoils of war are the only thing propping up the national finances, so we kind of need to keep fighting. But Carnot and Barthélemy both advocated signing a peace treaty to bring this long and costly war to a close. So you have this triumvirate within the directory saying, why would we want to stop fighting? We're winning. Why not drive all the way to Vienna and sack that too? Carnot, the mastermind, remember, of French victory. He's the author of the Levée en Masse, the author of the Amalgamé, and the overall director of strategy. And Barthélemy, this newly minted director who's a diplomat, both say, yeah, let's end this thing. In general, the opinion of the legislative councils, the newly elected with now a third more conservatism, they trended towards supporting a peace treaty. But even among those who wanted to end the war, the opinion was split. Conservatives wanted to make a generous peace with the Austrians. They wanted to say, basically, we're kind of sorry. Because they believed that being generous toward Austria was the first step down the road toward getting Austria to support the restoration of the French monarchy. Remember, Marie Antoinette was one of their own. She was sister to the current emperor. The old Thermidorian Republicans, on the other hand, wanted to extract serious concessions from the Republic's enemies. And those Thermidorians still had a very key ally, the army. We talked about several episodes back how the army was the single pillar holding up the directory's legitimacy. Well, the army was not monarchist. They were siding with the Republicans, the Thermidorians, and they wanted to also get pretty heavy concessions from Austria during these treaty negotiations. The army was not at all thrilled about rumors that politicians back in Paris were talking about returning territory to the Austrians that had been captured by their own sweat and blood. So the alliance between the Republicans and the Directory, the generals and the soldiers out in the frontier, and the Republican people back in France got stronger. Speaking on that newly won territory, General Bonaparte was seriously just still off on his own and continued to organize Italy to his own specifications. Pro-revolutionary elements within Genoa. So for you, where's Genoa? Genoa is basically along the Mediterranean coast down here. So this here is Genoa, if you can't make it out. This is Genoa. You can see that I wrote over what is known as the Ligurian Republic. But pro-revolutionary elements within the Republic of Genoa decided to preempt direct French intervention by organizing a coup and kicking out that oligarchic regime that was in control. And they proclaimed themselves to be a French-aligned Ligurian Republic. The thing that's important about this is Italy, at this point in history, is still raiding a bunch of, small now republics and still a bunch of city-states. But Genoa is where there was a lot of banking going on. A lot of financial resources now were down on that coastline in Genoa, and they were now under Bonaparte's disposal. I wouldn't say France's disposal. Because, yeah, they declared themselves to be French-aligned, but they were really declaring themselves to be Napoleon Bonaparte-aligned. But the rest of the political reorganization of Italy was not going 100% smoothly for Napoleon. The Cispadane Republic, that first of the new republics he had created, well, it held its own initial round of legislative elections in April 1795, and just as had happened in France, the electorate there in the Cispadane Republic returned a slate of very conservative, very anti-French delegates. And this was just too much to Napoleon's general annoyance, so at the beginning of July, he erased the Cispadane Republic and the Transpadane Republic from the map, which he had created like a year ago, and merged them into a single unit called the Cisalpine Republic. And he put his capital in Milan. One sec. Milan was by far the most pro-French region that Bonaparte had come across. So he submerged any nascent conservatism or Italian patriotism under the thumb of his Italian supporters in Milan. Meanwhile, back in Paris, Napoleon's unilateral reorganizations round 2 were met by fears that he was setting up personal client states for himself, which he could either use as the basis to form some new kingdom with himself as King Napoleon, or he could use as a springboard to then reinvade France and set himself up as dictator. Now, he wouldn't need to do either one of those things eventually. He's going to work the political system to get to power. But the fact that he had taken over a huge palace in Milan to serve as his overall personal headquarters didn't really do anything to soothe those fears of king or dictator Napoleon. But the Directory didn't have any avenue to censure him or recall him in any way. Even conservatives didn't want to mess with Napoleon's success, because this is the year, 1797, where everyone finally realizes that guy's winning the war. Over the summer, tensions between the Directory and let me say this again. Over the summer, tensions within the Directory, between the Republicans and their conservative colleagues, heightened over the issue, believe it or not, the issue of those old non-juring priests who had refused to take the civic oath way back during the National Assembly days. Remember those guys? National Assembly was trying to create a civic government institution and required the priests to take an oath loyal to France over the Vatican. Yeah, you're about to find out why, Rocket. So a big part of the Thermidorian reaction had been the acceptance of freedom of worship, right? Well, we're not really interested in whatever you do, whatever, have fun. We're not trying to tell you how to worship anybody. That was really a part of the Thermidorian reaction. It was part of Lazar Hoche's campaign to pacify the Vendée. Technically, these non-juring priests were still outlawed. They were still illegal because they had violated a law which is still in the books. The newly elected conservative delegates wanted to start easing up on this a little bit. And it feels like one of those things that they probably should have been like, duh, yeah, let's do this because religion's been such a divisive thing for, 7 years. However, for the Republicans, it was one thing to tolerate the non-juring priests, to kind of like, yeah, okay. And it was quite another to rehabilitate them. The Republicans were happy with the concept of, we won't come break down your door if you stay behind it. But at the end of June 1797, the Council of 500 voted to repeal the law which outlawed the non-juring priests. That vote, remember, the job of the Council of Ancients is to review bills that are coming up to it from the Council of 500. The Council of Ancients vetoed it. but it was still kind of obvious where all this was heading. The refractory priest, the non-juring priest, those terms apply to the same concept, who had done so much to turn France into a religious war zone, would soon be coming back out into the light, where they would no doubt fully support a restoration to the monarchy in some form. The other source of tension between Republicans and conservatives was the Directory's revenues and expenditures. Because the legislative councils, remember, technically controlled the budget. But the ministry itself conducted tax collections through its treasury ministry. The ministry of the treasury, had become a hotbed of conservatism. And together with allies in the new councils, the conservatives started annulling, cutting off, or depriving the Directory of its various revenue streams. How? Well, they started to work against the government by saying, good luck having a government when you've got no money to run a government. We've played our own version of chicken with this notion in the United States repetitively for like the past decade because we can't approve a budget, we just approve extensions. The immediate goal was to starve the executive branch of funds. Those funds which were needed to further prosecute the war, and in turn get the Directory to agree to those more lenient terms with the Austrians, which would then invite the Austrians to help restore the monarchy. The longer-term goal of these financial constraints being put in and kind of surrounding the directors was to break the independence of the executive arm, pack the legislative council with monarchists, and then invite the king, whichever one they picked, to come home. None of this was lost on the triumvirate of Republican directors who are now starting to feel like conservatives were successfully outmaneuvering them. But this also happens to be the moment when the Directory was given final proof of General Pichegru's correspondence with Louis XVIII. And this damning correspondence had actually been captured by General Moreau during his campaigns of 1796. But Moreau and Pichegru were old buddies. Now, we know that Pichegru is a royalist. We've talked about it a few times. And Moreau was certainly not a royalist. But he didn't want to rat on his friend. And so he sat on the evidence. Eventually, however, word of the letters reached Bonaparte. And the one thing I really haven't talked about is Bonaparte had a pretty good working relationship with Paul Barras. And so he forwarded everything about Pichegru to Paul Barras. So as it turned out, the newly elected current president of the Council of 500 was in league with Louis XVIII. This revelation appears to have come as a complete shock to Lazare Carnot, who pivoted away now from his argument that the Directory should passively respect the will of the people. Not that this pivot will come fast enough to save, or be strong enough to save Carnot from the coming events of the Coup of Fructidor. Let that one percolate for a minute. Lazare Carnot, guy pretty much who single-handedly turned the French army around and in turn turned the fortunes of France around, is about to get caught up in the Coup of Fructidor. In response to all this, the triumvirate took steps to secure their position. First, they asked General Hoche, who's out there on the Rhine frontier, to lead some men back down from the Rhine frontier. Oh, and you're going to go out west, back out to the Vendée. Of course, that's where you're going to go. But while you're on the way there, could you please stop through Paris? Make sure you take the road through Paris on your way. This order was actually unconstitutional, as there were rules about troops in the capital. Aside from that Grenelle garrison, which everyone keeps trying to get to start a coup or some sort of uprising, there were not supposed to be any army troops in Paris. But this is when the triumvirate starts to get in line with the idea of, we've got to break the Constitution to save it, and they stop paying too much attention to the Constitution. So when Hoche and his men passed through Paris, the Directory had them stick around a minute. Just to rest for a moment, you understand? Once the troops were in Paris, the triumvirate then implemented a radical reshuffling of their executive ministries on July 14th, which happens to be Bastille Day. They appointed a new and a guy who was an ally to head up the Ministry of Finance, and his job would be to reform and improve the Directory's revenue streams rather than, destroy them, as conservatives have been trying to do. And then they said, hey, Lazare Hoche, want to be Minister of War? Which he accepted. But about a week later, Hoche resigns that position when he realizes the triumvirate is positioning him to possibly lead some sort of attack on the democratically elected legislative councils. And then there is, of course, the post of Foreign Minister. This one's going to make everyone's day. The Directory was having trouble finding a man with the requisite experience and standing to take the job, which is when Paul Barras said, I've got a guy. And that guy turns out to be Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, or as we call him around here, Talleyrand. That's right.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
July 1797 marks Talleyrand's triumphant return to our narrative and the French public and political stage. Of course, we know Talleyrand. We did a pretty decent biography on him in the past. And if the triumvirate thought Talleyrand was going to run anyone's program but his own, they were obviously, sadly mistaken. So, when we left everyone's favorite slippery card shark of an ex-bishop, he had been booted from England in 1794 and then exiled to Philadelphia, where he spent the next 2 years. As soon as Talleyrand found out about the Thermidorian reaction, he immediately set to work on getting his name removed from that list of prescribed émigrés. Remember, Talleyrand left Paris under a passport that Georges Danton signed personally for him, pretty much on the eve of everything really going south for all of the aristocrats. But in his work to get off that list, Talleyrand had a very key friend in one Madame de Staël, who is right below him on your board, now on the right side of people. I foreshadowed her a long time ago, just to let you know how well outlined this show is, because she is the daughter of Jacques Necker. Yes, the finance minister, Jacques Necker, super economic wonder boy genius who really wasn't one. She's his daughter. She was just starting to come out and be a key center of intellectual gravity in Paris. She was an author, you'll remember I told you. I told you all about her when Necker was introduced. She is helping Talleyrand work the government to get his name off that prescribed émigré list. She was close to Barras, and through him she did manage to get Talleyrand's name removed from that prescribed émigré list at the end of 1795. So Talleyrand then happily ditched the United States in the spring of 1796. He then landed back in Europe in Hanover, which would be to the east, and he sat there for a few months to kind of get a feel for the situation before he actually, walked back into France. He really needed to know what the ground might look like for an amoral, noble ex-bishop with a checkered political past. But with the coast appearing to be clear, Talleyrand came back to France in September 1796, and then proceeded to just bide his time and wait for an opportunity to get back in the game. And that chance is coming, finally, right now. The triumvirate needed ministers who had experience and could maybe be trusted, maybe not so in this case. And so Barras tapped Talleyrand to serve as French foreign minister. It's a hell of a comeback, right? This guy he's been off the board for so long. But he is a survivor, man. And boy, is he cunning. And you're about to learn, because Talleyrand is going nowhere. Like, through the Napoleonic era, he's not going away now. He's going to be around for a while. But if the goal of this whole ministerial reshuffle was to preserve the Directory, putting Talleyrand in a key role was not the smartest idea going. Because as soon as he was in the government, Talleyrand took a look around and said, this isn't going to last. And he started planning for the future after the Directory. It also took Talleyrand about 3 seconds for him to survey Europe and go, whoa, who's this guy, Napoleon Bonaparte, who's kicking so much ass down in Italy? So, of course, Talleyrand immediately started up a regular correspondence with Bonaparte, sucking up to the young general and placating Napoleon's ego to the maximum, because Talleyrand knows what he's doing. Talleyrand congratulated Bonaparte on the deal he was striking up with the Austrians, while he kept his personal reservations about handing neutral Venice over to them to himself. But this is where the coup of 18 Brumaire, the event which will mark the end of Season 1 of Fixer's Heavy Metal History, starts. It is now officially in the making. The letters being exchanged between Talleyrand and Bonaparte from this point forward, and their machinations in the background, will eventually lead us to Napoleon being named first consul. And that is where we'll end the series in about 6.5 episodes. Talleyrand entered the Foreign Office at a pretty auspicious moment, but his own role in the subsequent negotiations with Austria would be pretty minor, because Bonaparte himself was leading those negotiations. And negotiating envoys had already been sent to Lille to meet with the British as well, to see what they wanted to do now that they were about to have no allies. But as the days and the weeks ticked by in Lille, the French envoys started to suspect that, hey, maybe the British were stringing them along, and they were right. Because British intelligence had it that the conservatives in France were on the rise, and that if they just waited, they could probably get a sweeter deal from them once they were in power than the one that the current French government was offering to them to end hostilities. Turns out, wait for it, one back channel that was recommending to the British that they stall turns out to be the new French Foreign Minister Talleyrand, who, as stated, believed from day one that the Directory was fatally flawed and would collapse one way or the other. So the dude is tapped on his shoulder, hey, would you like to be French Foreign Minister? He says, yeah, great. So walks in and says, uh-oh, well, we gotta have to replace this stuff. And then starts telling the British, yeah, don't come to peace terms with us. You'll get a better deal later. So, it's safe to say that Talleyrand spent his entire time as the Directory's foreign minister arranging for its demise. Along the way, he also made an absolute ton of money, because of course he did, through bribes and the fees he levied to simply allow people to talk to him, because that was also something he did. He is one of the most shady characters in history, but it's really hard to hate the guy because he's not he's not murdering anybody. He's just, you sit there, as Terry said in chat, he's playing 3D chess. He's so far ahead of everyone else's thinking to benefit himself and to a degree, France. It's just, it's funny to simply watch the stuff this guy pulled off. So we're going to take our second break, because believe it or not, that is the end of the elections of 1797. When we come back, we're going to get to the coup of Fructidor, which the Directory is already setting up by asking Lazar Host to just have his men stop in the capital for a minute. We're going to get into what is one of the more unique coups in history in the way it was executed, because most of the time you think coups come from the army or some rebel group that storms the palace and replaces the head of state. That is not what this coup is. It's still a governmental coup, but it's one that happens from the top down. And we'll learn what that means when we come back. Thanks for hanging out tonight, everybody. This is a longer episode. We are in the last third of my notes because the Treaty of Campo Formio will not take that long. Hopefully you're enjoying it. We'll have 6 episodes left at the end of tonight's show in season 1. Thank you all for being here. Get a drink, stand up, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, all that stuff. We'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes, and we'll roll into the famous coup of Fructidor and how exactly it went down when we get back. Welcome back. Two things to touch on before we get back into things tonight. First, if you're a member of the Outlaws community, do me a favor. It is our good friend Berlin's 50th birthday today, so I know he and I give each other a lot of crap, but happy birthday, dear friend, from the bottom of my heart. Love having you around, and I'm glad you're back on your feet after everything that went down earlier this year for you. It's good to have you back in the community. For the rest of you, if you want to pop into the forum and just say, happy birthday, Berlin. He's got his mom in town. He's celebrating with them today, and yeah, happy 50th birthday to our good friend. Second, on the dad front, Dad's doing great. Acting like a 4-year-old kid, testing all of his boundaries, but Dad's doing pretty good. Those of you that have kept up with the ongoing story of my father over the past month, it is 2 days short of when it all started, and he is taking pretty decently long walks now and doing really, really well. So, forgot to include that. There you go. Fix's dad doing pretty awesome. I'm going to go see him tomorrow after I have breakfast with my good friend Jay Mitch, who will be pulling into this area about 10 p.m. tonight. And we're going to go grab breakfast in the morning before he continues his drive back home. So, as you can see on the board as well tonight, Talleyrand's not the only old face we're going to bring back in. And we're going to get to Monsieur Gilbert de Motier near the end of things tonight. But before we get there, we have to talk about the actual coup of Fructidor. And this is one of those interesting things in history where it's just not how coups work, but it was a coup. Remember, as the conservatives started to pinch off the money, and as the directory started to reshuffle their ministerial appointments, including Talleyrand, they had also asked Lazar Hoche to, hey, can you bring some troops back from the frontier and take them out west and just stop in Paris along the way. Well, the combination of the influx of troops into Paris that weren't leaving and the ministerial reshuffle led to perfectly justified fear inside the legislative councils that the triumvirate's probably up to something. And those fears were not belayed when Hoche then decided, as I said, to resign as Minister of War and go back out to the front. He didn't take his troops with him, though. Within a few weeks, even more regular army troops had arrived in the capital, but this time they came from the army of Italy and were led by one of Bonaparte's key allies, General Pierre Augereau, who's the furthest bottom guy on your list, right next to the flag for Ukraine. As an institution, the army was clearly declaring that it was aligning itself with the current Republican government. And quite honestly, how can you blame the army for being in alignment with the Republican government? That army was now a machine of national industrial efficiency, with a merit-based promotion structure that had nothing to do with the nobility ceiling. Why would they want to revert back to the days of the ancien regime or some form of aristocratic monarchy that would return oligarchy to running the army? These guys were now being promoted based on merit. Kinda, more recently for sure. Why would they want to go back to an ancien regime system that said you guys can't go past captain unless your bloodline says so? Napoleon told his troops himself that he would personally lead them all back to France with, quote, an eagle's swiftness, end quote, if he felt the Republic was threatened. Inside the legislative councils, the delegates started to talk about how to protect themselves. They tentatively approved a plan to rebuild the National Guard. And in the meantime, they supported irregular armed bands inside the capital, which were presumably drawn from the Muscadins, who had proven so useful to conservatives in the past. So there you go. The conservative element of the directory is now trying to gin up its own force of troops. But none of these plans were going to roll out fast enough to stave off the triumvirate, who now believed that they had to destroy the Constitution in order to save it. So at the end of August, the conservatives again tried to repeal those laws against the non-juring priests, and this time they got the Council of Ancients to agree with them. And that was when the triumvirate decided they had to strike now before things got any worse. So on September 3rd, 1797, or 18 Fructidor year 5, Paris woke up to find itself under a military occupation. Soldiers had been dispatched to occupy all of the key strategic positions in Paris. It's almost like they learned their lesson from how the past several years had gone. The Parisians also discovered the streets plastered with anti-royalist propaganda, as this is the moment when the Republican government decided to let the evidence of Pichegru's treason be revealed to everybody. They were literally plastering it up in the city. The triumvirate then issued arrest warrants for 53 council deputies and the other 2 of their directorial colleagues, Carnot and the new director Barthélemy. With the full support of the army, these arrests were carried out swiftly and efficiently. Then, a very carefully chosen quorum of council delegates met under the protection of armed soldiers to officially sanction this deployment of troops in Paris and approve the subsequent arrests. So, the Republicans have arrested Barthélemy and Carnot, 53 other delegates, and then they said, yeah, let's pick the delegates we want from the council, so who's going to vote with us and exclude the conservatives, have them come in and vote to approve everything we just did. And then this is when this loyal Republican quorum, this specially picked subsection of delegates, really dropped the hammer. They retroactively annulled the results of the spring elections of 1797 in 49 departments, which immediately purged 177 members from the legislative councils. This Fructidor coup, a coup from above, conducted by the active sitting executive in collusion with elements of the legislative branch, was carried out quickly and professionally. There was zero pushback. There was no fighting in the streets. This nascent thrust through the elections of year 5 by conservatives to to restore the French monarchy was thus successfully parried by the triumvirate of directors. In the immediate aftermath of the Fructidor coup, Pichegru and the other arrested delegates were tried, convicted of treason, and then exiled to French Guiana. But many of them managed to survive the subsequent ordeal, including Pichegru, who eventually managed to escape to the United States. And from there he got to London, where he attached himself to the staff of a Russian general during the coming War of the Second Coalition. He then slips back into France in 1803 to organize a royalist coup against what would then now be First Consul Napoleon Bonaparte, but Pichegru is betrayed in that effort and gets arrested in early 1804. And after he's arrested that time, the guards in his prison cell discover that he had accidentally strangled himself to death. As for the great organizer of victory, author of the Amalgamate and the Levée en Masse, Lazare Carnot actually managed to escape from his cell and then slipped across the border into neutral Switzerland. And it's pretty clear that Carnot got the short end of the stick here, right? And this dude's done a lot. He was pretty much one of the sane voices on the Committee of Public Safety, and still just his overall goal was, let's just go win a war. His only real crime was advocating generous peace terms for the Austrians. And this wasn't because he was looking to bring back the monarchy. Carnot was a staunch Republican. It was just that he had been the guy running the war for 3 years, and he just knew intimately how destructive and destabilizing it had been. And when it was put to bed, he wanted to stay there. He believed that the hard line in the negotiating that was being advocated by Republicans was simply sow the seeds of another war. And he's not wrong. There were hard penalties enforced on Germany at the end of World War I. Just hammer blow hard. And it led to World War II. Carnot's not wrong. Bonaparte himself seems to recognize that Carnot kind of got swept up in something he should not have been here. And down the road, Carnot will be recalled from Switzerland in 1800 to briefly serve as Minister of War. And then he will go into the legislative councils and serve there of the coming executive consulate, which is going to replace the Directory. For the rest of Napoleon's consular reign, Carnot will have an on-again, off-again relationship with the Little Corporal. Carnot will then finally retire from public life in protest when Napoleon crowns himself emperor, but then he'll later come back to serve in the War of the Sixth Coalition. Yes, there will be that many. And then in what is known as the 100 Days. Those of you who know Napoleonic history know what that is. For those of you that don't know, we'll get to that in Season 2. Carnot was exiled, but not killed for being a regicide, due to his vote to execute Louis XVI when the Bourbon Restoration comes along. So he's going to make it all the way to when Louis XVIII actually becomes Louis XVIII, and they're going to kick him out of France again because they're going to go back and say, who voted to kill my brother? Oh, you did. You're gone. That is how harsh that will be when the Bourbon Restoration comes along. So he'll be kicked out of France, and then he'll die in Prussia in 1823. So Carnot's not done within our story, but he's done for now. And then we will get to the broader impact of the Fructidor coup next episode, in which we will talk about something that is known as the directorial terror, which is about to unfold. Just so you know, historians use the coup of Fructidor to divide the Directory from the Second Directory. The Directory was a constitutional government which lasted from 1795 to September 1797. The Second Directory was a revolutionary government that simply did whatever it took to stay in power, kind of like the Committee of Public Safety. It will engineer and annul elections to suit its own purposes until it is taken down by a coup organized by Bonaparte and Talleyrand in November 1799. So it's important to draw a line here.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Because everything that led to this moment was legal. Pretty legal. The Directory and its legislative bodies had been operating under a constitution. And for the most part, everybody had been obeying that constitution. But the Directory just threw that out the window. They're still in power, and that constitution's still there. It's clonk that follow button, Rocket. But the constitution's still there, but the Directory just had its first taste of, wait a minute, we don't have to follow the rules and we can stay in power? I gotta do it again. A couple more times. It's playing twice on top of itself. That's really weird. That's interesting. Let's turn that one off. Let's go over here and turn that off. It's off for now. I didn't know about the echoey part. Sounds weird. It was not enough for me to discern what you were saying, but thank you. So the Second Directory, like I said, it's a revolutionary government. It's not a constitutional government. It just does whatever it needs to do to stay in power. So believe it or not, I'm going to bring this episode, which sprawled across many topics and many people, in for a close by covering the treaty that actually does end the war of the First Coalition. After this treaty, the Treaty of Campo Formio, there will be no more coalition. It will just be Britain fighting against France. So, France isn't done fighting, just Austria is. In the end, this entire treaty is modeled primarily on the preliminaries at Leoben, which we opened this episode with. And it seems that both the British and the Austrians had kind of been stringing out negotiations while they waited to see how the political situation in Paris unfolded. When that political situation unfolded into the coup of Fructidor, the British and Austrians had opposite reactions. The British, as you can tell, broke off all peace talks. Decided to carry on with the war, which will primarily be a naval war. Cue Master and Commander. The Austrians essentially signed the same deal they had agreed to at Leoben. Meeting at Campo Formio in October 1797, Bonaparte and an Austrian diplomat whose name I'm not going to mention in an episode chock full of names, signed the Treaty of Campo Formio. In a mixture of 9 public and 11 secret clauses, the French got all of the territory west of the Rhine, and the Austrians got Venice, and everyone recognized the independence of the new Italian republics, which this is where Italy forming as a single nation starts, historically. Also included in this treaty was the release of certain prominent prisoners of war, including, as we mentioned way back when he chose to cross the lines rather than be murdered in Paris, the Marquis de Lafayette. He was frail, but in good spirits after 5 years in captivity, and Lafayette was let out of jail and reunited with his family. And we will also hear a lot more from Lafayette as we go down the line. He's not going to be a guy who likes Napoleon, especially Emperor Napoleon, very much, and he's going to hang around all the way through the July Monarchy, which will kind of overthrow the Bourbon Restoration. So we've got another solid 33 years plus of the Marquis de Lafayette. With Austria out of the war, and the war on the continent proper, the land war, now pretty much over, only the British stood against France. When this conflict, you'll remember, started in 1792, the British had done everything in their power to not get involved, and then they said, well, we got to make sure the Austrian Netherlands don't end up in the hands of the French. But now that they were involved, they were going to stay involved, allies or no allies. So next week, or next episode, hopefully next week, we're going to pivot to episode 1.40. That's 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. 6 episodes to go. The second directory will plunge France into a new kind of terror as it consolidates its power in the wake of the Fructidor coup. The second directory will also recall Napoleon Bonaparte back from Austria, because there's nothing to do there now, and order him to, wait for it, prepare an invasion of the British Isles. But Napoleon's going to take a look at that, survey the prospects for victory, go and say, it didn't go so well for Lazare Hoche, and now you're not saying go to Ireland, go to England. And he'll just tell the directory flat out, that's not going to work. Instead, he will tell them that if they really want to hit the British hard, then they should allow him to organize an invasion of Egypt, which they will agree to. And it will set the stage for some of the most well-known escapades of Napoleon before he becomes emperor. Famous Battle of the Nile is encapsulated in this. Lord Horatio Nelson, the Catrafacts, and the rectangular tactics of Napoleon's desert campaign are very interesting to look at. And that will be The evaluation of the Egyptian campaign will be next episode, and the following episode will be, yes, Napoleon did not shoot the nose off the Sphinx, and everything else that went down as he landed in Egypt. So thank you for hanging out with me tonight for the 39th episode of Fixer's Heavy Metal History. We have a quiz, as always, here, and we encourage you all to take part, whether you're lurking or not. The quiz is designed to help me get a gauge on how much you're retaining, but there is no wrong answer. You don't lose a point or anything. We just keep track of how many right answers you get. And this is the last season of season 1, because the quiz just was putting up too many points. So it's exclamation point answer, space, and then your answer. Do not use the words boy or fix with 2 X's in your response. And at the end of the season, the person who is at the top either gets a piece of swag from my store valued $20 or less, or they can tell me to donate that $20 to whatever cause we're supporting at the time. Probably still the Ukrainian Red Cross. So, without further ado, but probably with new audio problems that we're going to have to sort out as soon as we get there, here is the quiz. Yep. Transition's sure not playing. Let me look at that one real quick. We'll turn that one. Oh, it disappeared. Well, we're going to have to fix that one down the road. Close. Yep. I'll fix that one after. I know that one's not working. The music is playing. The quiz music is playing, but it is not outputting the desktop audio, so let's get that one fixed. Because, as I stated, a new preamp is in place here. So there's the quiz transition. We'll go put that one on monitor. And we'll put the music. Get ready for it. Here it comes. All right, now you should hear the music. And we'll have to fiddle with a few more of these things because the preamp is now running off a software mixer, which I have to play with a little bit. But anyway. There it is. Yeah. It's just the way in which you address it in OBS that's different. And I have to go through a bunch of stuff and fix it because the new amp's worth it. There it is. There it is. First question of the night. Again. Do your best. No jokey answers, but take a swing. See if you get it. What was the name of the treaty Pope Pius VI signed with Bonaparte, which ended Napoleon's aggression toward the Papal States? Rockets in with 25 seconds left. What was the name of the treaty Pope Pius VI signed it with Bonaparte? The quiz music is echoey as well. If that is the case, then let's do this. Interesting. How about now? Well, give me a shout the next time we do it, Rocket. I'm just trying to tweak things at this point. Rocket the only answer? Rocket is the only answer. Let's see what she said. The Leoben Priest preliminaries. No, that is not the treaty which ended the fighting with the Pope. It was called the Treaty of Toliento. The Leoben preliminaries would actually be the thing that creates the armistice between Austria and France. The next question. And listen for the quiz music to be echoey, or play it all. And once I correct a couple of typos in this one, because I was writing in a hurry today, because it was Community Day in Sea of Thieves. After Napoleon was reinforced following the fall of Mantua, who did the Austrians send to attempt to stop his advance against their southern flank? I know how to fix the echoing of sounds to get that done via an aux jack into the mixer. I've got a funny feeling we'll be troubleshooting little pieces of this for a couple weeks. And audio is not my forte. Hopefully you hear the quiz music now. Still has echo. How about... Oh, because you're hearing the actual video. That's, yeah, I can't do anything about that right now. I know why that is, though. Because it's coming from the bot, and the bot is being outputted twice. Let me try this one real quick. The answer, which came from Rocket and only Rocket. Pretty sure it was Rocket and only Rocket? Archduke Charles, that is correct. Archduke Charles was sent down, but he really couldn't do anything with it. Just was in a horrible position. Alright, the next question. The Leoben preliminaries contained a controversial provision with respect to concessions to Austria. What was it? Maybe the quiz music isn't echoing anymore? Uh-oh. All right. 3 answers this time. The first from Rocket. Napoleon gave them neutral Venice, Vienna, which they did not have. Yes, no echo. Okay, now I know the setting. Thank you very much for working with me during the episode. It's the only way to do it live. That helps me a ton. I'm actually going to have to adjust a few other things because what I did was turn the monitor off in the software mixer. That's where the echo is coming from. So no echo. Good. It was not Vienna, but Venice. That's where Rocket said, oh crap, in her answer. So it is Venice, not Vienna, which is what Arky said. Austria got control of Venice. That is correct. I believe that's also what Turi said. Gives Venice to Austria. Correct. Gives Venice. Still funny, because they didn't actually own Venice. The next question.
Well, it's about tree-fitty.
Hopefully that didn't echo as well. The Friends of Order was the name of the conservative political movement in France in 1797. What was the name of the political social club which organized its efforts? For 15 pages, I got through that pretty quickly. I'm actually pretty proud of myself because there's a lot of writing. The Friends of Order was the name of the conservative political movement in France in 1797. What was the name of the political social club which organized its efforts? I love how you answered your question with a question mark, Rocket. The Friends of Order was the name of the conservative political movement of France in 1797. What was the name of the political social club which organized its efforts? Rocket, the only answer. The Philanthropic Society. That is correct. The next question. What was the name of the clique which formed within the conservative movement in 1797, which still plotted an outright governmental overthrow? What was the name of the clique which formed within the conservative movement in 1797, which still plotted an outright governmental overthrow? No question this time. Yep, he did not put a question in there this time. 25 seconds. What was the name of the clique which formed within the conservative movement in 1797, which still plotted an outright governmental overthrow? Rocket, the only answer. The Legitimate Sons. That is correct. It wouldn't go well for the Legitimate Sons. The next question. This one should be pretty easy. Hopefully a couple of you get this one. Who did the new Council of 500 elect as their president in 1797?
Must play me again.
What?
Best 2 out of 3.
No way!
Yes way.
Yes, way.
Perfect one to come up. The doc. Who did the new Council of 500 elect as their president in 1797? You have 25 seconds left. Rocket is in. Five seconds left. Rocket again, the only answer, I think. General Pichegru, correct. General Charles Pichegru was elected as the new president of the Council of 500, you know, before they were all expelled and he was arrested. Rocket got it. The next question. Is... After the spring elections of 1797, what was the one particular issue which caused heightened tensions between the Republican and conservative members of the Directory? Couldn't remember his name to save my life. After the spring elections of 1797, what was the one particular issue which caused heightened tensions between the Republican and conservative members of the Directory? Rockets in with 20 seconds left. Rocket again, the only answer. Her answer, the issues with the priests who refuse to take the oath. Yes, the non-juring priests from way back in the civic oath days and how they should be handled post-Thermidor. That was the big issue, somehow. The next question, and number 8 for the night of 10. Talleyrand's return to political power in France was assisted by Madame de Staël. Who was her father? Rocket's in. One of these days we'll get that spelling down, Rocket. On this guy's name. I think it's like the 5th variant of his name I've seen you type all time. Just funny to me. "25 seconds left. Talleyrand's return to political power in France was assisted by Madame de Staël. Who was her father?" It's all right. It just is, it tickles me is all. If you could tell, I spelled Campo Formio about 12 times in my draft, and I go back and fix it. So it's not just you. The only answer again from Rocket. Necker. Jacques Necker. Yes, financial wonder boy. Not really a financial genius. Jacques Necker from way back in the before the States General days. His daughter, Madame de Staël, soon to be author and political influencer, helps Talleyrand get off the proscribed emigre list and get him back into France, which opens the door to him becoming the new foreign minister of the Directory, from which he will start working to actively destroy the Directory. The next question, and second to last, what is a fairly unique aspect of how the coup of Fructidor was executed? That was on purpose. Rocket is in again. All right, here's my answer. It was a top-down coup, which is really generally not how coups happen. Coups are usually organized by an outside rebellious group looking to remove the senior executive officer, or they are run by military, where the military swings in and usually places some sort of junta of generals in charge. This coup was executed by the executive against its own government from the top down, to keep the same government in power, which is really unique in history. Rocket's answer. It was done quietly, no one really fought against it, and it was with the backing of the army. Now, the top-down part's a really important part. If you look back in history at all the coups that have happened, they usually come from the outside or from the underneath, and a top-down coup is pretty rare. The last question of the night, and the reason I removed the notes from the board. Name the treaty that ended the War of the First Coalition, leaving Britain as the only belligerent still fighting France. Name the treaty that ended the War of the First Coalition, leaving Britain as the only belligerent still fighting France. Boy, oh boy, have we come a long way in that fight. Name the treaty that ended the War of the First Coalition, leaving Britain as the only belligerent still fighting France. You have 5 seconds. No one answered. Well, that treaty was called, remember, the Leoben Preliminaries set the stage for the Treaty of Campo Formio. The Treaty of Campo Formio is what gave France all the territory up to the west bank of the Rhine River and gave Venice to the Austrians. So before we move on here, we'll go back over to the main screen.
Let's rock!
Yep. Close that one down. So we've got about, 6 episodes left now in season 1, where this has been a heavy political season. Napoleon will not be. Napoleonic Empire era is going to be much quicker of a season, but it's also going to be a much more militarily focused season. So I am curious, is the way in which I've presented the battles, I tend to skim past battles that are kind of like they need to be mentioned but are tactically inconsequential, and then zoom in on the ones that are big time important to show you how troops moved and things like that. Is that a good way for you guys to learn and digest that information? For instance, last week when we really covered Napoleon winning at Mantua, we didn't go into Mantua, but we did cover Rivoli. Rivoli in detail, set up Mantua easily so that you can just picture it in your mind. That's how I intend to do Napoleon. If you guys want more depth, it will obviously extend the season, but I want to make sure that the way I'm approaching things militarily now is something that you guys, the way in which I do it is something that you guys actually enjoy, the method of learning it. If not, give me some feedback. I'm more than willing to take it. But other than that, one last note, you'll note our good friend Gilly was not here. It is his anniversary today, so happy anniversary to Gilly and Ari, and hopefully you catch up during the week, my friend. You missed a throwback episode, bringing Talleyrand and Lafayette back into things, as well as a holy crap episode for everything that really happened here. For the rest of you, those of you who are lurking, those of you who have participated, I appreciate it. Thank you as always for your time and attention as we have learned about the French Revolution. It really is about to become Napoleon and Talleyrand's show. Once we get out of Egypt in 2 episodes, it really will be his show until we bring this thing in for a landing with that Coup of Brumaire, which I again have foreshadowed and have now told you who at least 2 of the participants in it are. But we're going to get out of here. Let's see if there's someone we can drop a raid on. I know Richie was streaming. I'm not sure if he still is. And who else is streaming? Richie is still streaming. Sturfers, holy crap, how are you? Well, there's 30-some episodes in there, Sturf, that you can go and play. It's good to see you. She's been moving. All right. Richie Cranium is still streaming. We're going to go raid him, even though he probably only has about an hour left in his stream. No one else is really up tonight. So we raided Richie last week, but Richie's a friend, and he's part of the community, so we're going there again. Pleasure to have you here as well, Turi. We are going to go raid Richie Cranium. We're going to get out of here. Make sure you stick around for your stream. He's a cool guy. Thank you, as always, again, for your time and attention. And I will catch you during the week, and hopefully we continue to sort out the new audio issues that have been presented by this new preamp, but it is going to enable me to have better audio quality. So I'll work on it, and I'll continue to take your feedback, probably on some gaming streams, just to make sure it all works right, and we'll go from there. My good friend, Odd Dustin, Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 10:30. Last seen playing Assault and Sacrifice. Probably still playing that this week. Make sure you give him a follow, as well as our friend Permanoob, who's on hiatus from streaming right now due to a lot of work that just needs done in his personal life. Was playing Forbidden West. He's on Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. when he usually streams. And then there's our good friend Gilius, who's just mentioned happy anniversary. Was that Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, starting at 6 p.m. Also playing Forbidden West right now, as well as Intent Rocket. I can't even pin down your schedule. She was playing Immortals Phoenix Rising yesterday. In the afternoons, weekdays, sometimes on Saturday mornings. Give her a follow as well. And then there's our good friend CF Live, who has made the music for this show, our BRB music, some of our intro music, and it generally does an awesome dude. Give him a follow, please. And on top of that, go follow Mr. Landiggity, who also helped out with the music and helped make... He plays some games, get a Merry Feast. Great guy. I'm out of here. Talk to you later. Have a great weekend. Thanks for being here.